The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as tiny bodies pressed against cold linoleum. Their Superman backpacks and princess lunchboxes scattered like abandoned toys across the cafeteria floor. 6-year-old Marcus whimpered softly, his face buried against his folded arms, while Sarah clutched her stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles had turned white. The tactical boots of 3 police officers surrounded them, weapons drawn, voices barking commands that made no sense to kindergarten minds. Stay down, don't move. The children didn't understand why story time had turned into this nightmare, why the nice lady in the wheelchair wasn't there to protect them anymore. Just 30 minutes earlier, Mrs. Elena Carter had been guiding her students through their morning reading circle, her gentle voice bringing the very hungry caterpillar to life, with animated gestures and warm smiles. The classroom smelled of crayons and vanilla air freshener, sunlight streaming through windows decorated with paper butterflies the children had made the day before. Elena's wheelchair was positioned perfectly in the center of the colorful carpet, allowing each child to see the picture book's vibrant illustrations as she turned each page with practiced ease. Her dark skin glowed in the morning light, her eyes sparkling with the same wonder she'd maintained through 15 years of teaching, despite the progressive multiple sclerosis that had changed her life 5 years ago. "And what do you think the caterpillar will eat next?" Elena asked, her voice carrying the musicality that made children lean forward in anticipation. Little hands shot up like rockets, each child desperate to share their prediction. This was her sanctuary, this moment when young minds opened like flowers to possibility and learning. She had transformed this classroom into a haven of acceptance and growth, where differences were celebrated and every child felt seen, heard, and valued. Down the hallway, Karen Hutchins stood outside the principal's office, her thin lips pressed into a hard line as she clutched a manila folder against her chest. The substitute teacher's pale hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from barely contained rage that had been simmering for months. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, and her gray eyes held a coldness that seemed to leach warmth from the cheerful school environment around her. She had been waiting for this opportunity, planning for it, and now the moment had finally arrived. The principal's office door opened, and Dr. Williams emerged with a warm smile that immediately faltered when she saw Karen's expression. "Ms. Hutchins, I wasn't expecting to see you until 3rd period. Is everything all right?" The older black woman had been leading Riverside Elementary for 12 years, building a reputation for fairness and excellence that had transformed the school into a model for inclusive education. She sensed trouble in Karen's rigid posture, the way the substitute teacher's jaw worked silently, as if chewing on bitter words. "I need to speak with you immediately," Karen said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "It's about Mrs. Carter." The name came out like an accusation, loaded with venom that made Dr. Williams' stomach clench with sudden unease. She had dealt with personality conflicts before, but something in Karen's tone suggested this went far deeper than professional disagreement. "Dr. Williams gestured toward her office, but Karen shook her head sharply. "This can't wait. I have evidence of serious misconduct, and I won't be silenced again." The words hung in the air like a threat, drawing the attention of 2 teachers who had been discussing lesson plans nearby. Their conversations died as they sensed the electricity crackling between the 2 women, the kind of tension that precedes a storm. Inside Elena's classroom, the children had moved on to their art project, small fingers working diligently with safety scissors and construction paper. Elena moved between their desks with fluid motions, her wheelchair navigating the familiar space with practiced grace. She paused beside Tommy's desk, where the shy boy was struggling to cut out a perfect circle. "Remember what we learned about patience, Tommy," Sometimes the most beautiful things take a little extra time, she said softly, her hand gentle on his shoulder. The boy looked up with a gap-toothed grin, his confidence restored by her quiet encouragement. Karen's voice rose in the hallway, sharp enough to slice through the morning calm. She's manipulating those children, filling their heads with dangerous ideas. I've documented everything. Every inappropriate comment, every violation of proper teaching protocol. Her folder flew open as she gestured wildly, papers scattering like autumn leaves across the polished floor. Doctor? Williams knelt to help gather them, but Karen snatched them away protectively. You won't cover for her anymore. I know what she really is. The words struck Dr. Williams like a physical blow, their implication clear and ugly. In all her years as an educator, she had hoped that such naked prejudice was becoming extinct in modern schools. But Karen's hatred burned bright as a beacon of everything wrong with the world. Ms. Hutchins, I think you need to step back and consider what you're saying. Mrs. Carter is one of our most respected teachers. Respected. Karen's laugh was harsh, brittle. She's a threat to these children, and I have proof. I won't let political correctness protect a terrorist any longer. The word hung in the air like poison gas, contaminating everything around it. Two teachers gasped audibly, their faces pale with shock at the vicious accusation. Dr. Williams felt the world tilt beneath her feet, understanding suddenly that she was dealing with something far more dangerous than a disgruntled employee. In the classroom, Elena noticed the change in atmosphere before she heard the footsteps in the hallway. Children were remarkably sensitive to adult tension, and several of her students had looked up from their art projects with uncertain expressions. She moved her wheelchair closer to the door, her teacher's instincts alert to potential trouble. Through the narrow window, she could see figures gathering in the hallway, their body language suggesting conflict. Her heart began to beat faster, though she couldn't yet understand why. Karen pulled her cell phone from her purse with shaking hands, her face flushed with righteous fury. If you won't protect these children, I will. She stepped away from Dr. Williams, her finger already dialing the 3 numbers that would change everything. 911. I need to report a terrorist threat at Riverside Elementary School. There's a teacher here with explosives, and she's threatening the children. The emergency operator's voice crackled through the phone speaker. Ma'am, can you repeat that? Did you say explosives? Karen's voice grew stronger, more confident as she wove her web of lies. Yes, I'm a teacher here, and I've discovered that Elena Carter is hiding dangerous materials in her classroom. She's been radicalizing the children, teaching them anti-American propaganda. I believe she's planning something terrible. Each word was calculated, designed to trigger the maximum response from authorities already on edge in an era of school violence and terror threats. Dr. Williams lunged forward, trying to grab the phone, but Karen stepped back with predatory satisfaction. The call was already made, the poison already injected into the bloodstream of emergency response. Within minutes, patrol cars would be racing toward the school, officers preparing for the worst-case scenario. The machinery of fear and prejudice had been set in motion, and there was no calling it back. The first police cruiser arrived within 3 minutes, its sirens wailing like banshees through the quiet suburban morning. Elena heard the sound through her classroom windows and felt her stomach drop with inexplicable dread. Children began to look around nervously, their young faces reflecting her own growing concern. It's okay. Everyone, she said softly, trying to maintain the calm that was her trademark. Probably just a drill we forgot about. But this was no drill. The police officers who burst through the school's front doors were in full tactical gear, their faces grim beneath protective helmets. They had been told they were entering a potential terrorist situation, that an armed and dangerous individual was threatening children. The description they'd received painted a picture of imminent danger that demanded immediate, overwhelming response. Karen watched from the hallway window as more units arrived, satisfaction blooming in her chest like a dark flower. This was justice. Finally, after months of watching Elena receive praise and recognition that Karen believed she herself deserved. The wheelchair-bound teacher had been untouchable for too long, protected by her disability and race from the criticism Karen felt she warranted. But now, the truth would come out, and everyone would see Elena for what Karen believed she truly was. The school's intercom crackled to life with Dr. Williams's shaky voice. "Teachers, please implement lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. Secure your classrooms and await further instruction." Elena's blood turned to ice as she processed the words. Lockdown meant real danger, not the practice exercises they conducted monthly. She moved quickly to her classroom door, engaging the deadbolt with hands that trembled despite her efforts to remain calm. "Children, we need to move away from the windows and sit quietly on the carpet," Elena said, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. The children responded with the trained obedience that came from too many practice drills in an age when schools had become potential battlefields. They gathered around her wheelchair in a protective circle, their trust in her absolute, even as confusion filled their young eyes. The first officers reached Elena's classroom within minutes, their arrival preceded by the thunderous sound of boots on linoleum. Elena heard them in the hallway, heard the sharp commands and radio chatter that spoke of serious purpose. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they were stopping at her door, that somehow this emergency was connected to her presence in the building. "This is the police. Open the door immediately." The voice was harsh, brooking no argument. Elena looked at her students, saw the fear blooming in their faces, and made the only choice she could. She moved her wheelchair toward the door, her hands shaking as she reached for the deadbolt. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to the children. "Just stay calm and do exactly what they say." The door swung open to reveal 3 officers in full tactical gear, their weapons drawn and trained on Elena's position. For a moment that stretched like eternity, the kindergarten classroom became a war zone, complete innocence confronting the brutal machinery of law enforcement response. The officers' eyes swept the room, searching for the terrorist threat they'd been told to expect, finding instead a disabled teacher and 20 terrified children. "Step away from the wheelchair." The lead officer's voice boomed through the small space, causing several children to begin crying. Elena raised her hand slowly, her mind reeling with incomprehension. "I can't step away," she said quietly, her voice barely audible above the children's sobs. "I can't walk. This is my wheelchair." The officer's face showed a flicker of uncertainty, but his training and the radio chatter in his ear kept his weapon raised. Someone had called in a credible terrorist threat, naming Elena Carter specifically as the danger. He couldn't afford to let his guard down, couldn't risk the lives of children on the assumption that the threat was false. "Where are the explosives? We know you have them." Elena's world tilted sideways as understanding dawned with horrible clarity. Someone had accused her of terrorism, had painted her as a threat to the very children she would die to protect. The injustice of it struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her gasping. "There are no explosives," she managed to say. "This is a kindergarten classroom. These are my students." More officers flooded into the room, their presence overwhelming in the small space designed for learning and growth. They began searching through Elena's desk, her supplies, her carefully organized teaching materials, looking for evidence of the threat they'd been told existed. Children's artwork was scattered, books thrown aside, the sanctity of the classroom violated by the desperate search for weapons that didn't exist. In the hallway, Karen watched through the classroom window with growing unease. She had expected Elena to be arrested quietly, taken away without the dramatic response now unfolding. The sight of terrified children being ordered to the ground by armed officers stirred something uncomfortable in her chest. A flicker of conscience she quickly suppressed. This was Elena's fault, she told herself. If the woman hadn't been here in the first place, none of this would be happening. The children were moved to the cafeteria under heavy guard, their small bodies pressed against the cold floor, while officers secured the building. Elena was separated from them immediately, her wheelchair surrounded by officers, as she was questioned with increasing intensity. "Who are you working with? What was your target?" The questions came like blows, each one more absurd than the last to Elena's reeling mind. Dr. Williams arrived at the cafeteria to find her youngest students traumatized, their faces streaked with tears as they lay motionless on the floor. The sight broke something fundamental inside her. The recognition that an institution dedicated to nurturing children had become a place of terror through one woman's malicious lie. She knelt beside the officers, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "These are kindergartners. Whatever you think is happening here, these children are innocent." The bomb squad arrived in a convoy of specialized vehicles, their equipment designed to deal with the explosive devices Karen had claimed Elena was hiding. They swept the classroom with methodical precision, their instruments detecting nothing more dangerous than finger paints and safety scissors. The absence of any threat should have been a relief, but instead, it raised uncomfortable questions about the anonymous tip that had triggered this massive response. Elena sat in the school office, still in her wheelchair, but now surrounded by detectives who seemed increasingly skeptical of the terrorist narrative they'd been given. Her teaching credentials were impeccable, her background check spotless, her record at the school exemplary. The woman before them bore no resemblance to the dangerous radical described in the 911 call, and experienced officers knew the difference between genuine threats and malicious fiction. "Mrs. Carter, can you think of anyone who might want to cause trouble for you?" Detective Morrison asked gently, his tone shifting from interrogation to investigation. Elena's mind immediately went to Karen, to the months of subtle hostility and pointed comments that had followed her report about the substitute teacher's harsh treatment of students. But accusing a colleague felt like betraying everything she believed about professional cooperation and giving others the benefit of the doubt. Parents began arriving at the school in growing numbers, their faces etched with panic as they sought information about their children's safety. The parking lot filled with cars and news vans, reporters smelling a story that combined education, security, and racial tension into an irresistible narrative. Dr. Williams stood at the school's entrance, trying to manage the chaos while protecting both her students and her staff from further trauma. Karen found herself cornered by investigators who wanted to understand exactly how she had come to suspect Elena of terrorist activities. Her story began to unravel under careful questioning, the holes in her narrative becoming more apparent with each attempt to explain her accusations. She had no evidence of radical behavior, no proof of dangerous materials, no credible basis for the explosive claims she had made to emergency services. "I've been watching her for months," Karen insisted, her voice rising with desperation as she felt control slipping away. "She fills those children's heads with propaganda, teaches them to hate America, to question authority. She's dangerous, even if you can't see it." The investigators exchanged glances, recognizing the familiar pattern of prejudice disguised as patriotism, hatred masked as concern for safety. The truth began to emerge in fragments as detectives dug deeper into Karen's history at the school. They discovered her previous complaints about Elena, her resentment over being passed over for a permanent position, her growing isolation from other staff members who found her attitudes troubling. The picture that emerged was not of a concerned educator, but of a woman consumed by racial animus and professional jealousy. Elena's students were finally reunited with their parents in the school gymnasium, tearful reunions playing out against the backdrop of police tape and emergency vehicles. Many of the children clung to their families, too young to understand what had happened, but old enough to know they had been frightened by people who were supposed to protect them. The psychological damage would take time to heal. Counseling sessions and gentle conversations needed to restore their sense of safety. As evening fell and the immediate crisis passed, the broader implications began to settle over the school community, like ash from a fire. A decorated teacher had been falsely accused of terrorism. Children had been traumatized, and the bonds of trust that held the school together had been strained nearly to breaking. The racial undertones of the incident could not be ignored. The targeting of a disabled black educator by a white substitute teacher fitting too neatly into patterns of historical injustice. Karen was arrested that evening on charges of filing a false police report and reckless endangerment, the handcuffs closing around her wrists as she maintained her innocence to anyone who would listen. "You're making a mistake," she called out as she was led to the patrol car. "She's the real threat here, not me." But her words fell on deaf ears, the evidence of her deception too overwhelming to ignore. The security footage from the school's cameras would later reveal Karen's careful planning in the weeks leading up to her false report. She had been observed entering Elena's empty classroom after hours, planting what investigators would discover were harmless items meant to appear suspicious under cursory examination. Her preparation for the false accusation had been methodical, her hatred deep enough to risk the safety of innocent children in pursuit of her twisted version of justice. 3 weeks later, the Riverside Elementary School community gathered in the gymnasium for an emergency school board meeting. The room packed beyond capacity with parents, teachers, and concerned citizens. The fluorescent lights that had seemed so harsh during the lockdown now illuminated faces marked by anger, confusion, and a determination to ensure such an incident never happened again. Elena sat in the front row, her wheelchair positioned where everyone could see her, the support of her colleagues and students' families evident in their protective circle around her. Dr. Williams stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd that had filled every available seat and spilled into the hallway beyond. "We are here tonight to discuss the events of 3 weeks ago, to seek accountability, and to ensure that our school remains a place where every child and educator is safe from harassment and false accusations." The room was silent, except for the occasional shuffle of feet and the quiet whir of Elena's wheelchair as she adjusted her position. Karen's attorney had advised her not to attend the meeting, knowing that her presence would only inflame tensions in a community still raw from the trauma she had inflicted. But her absence spoke volumes, leaving an empty chair that seemed to represent her complete abandonment of responsibility for the chaos she had created. The substitute teacher who had once claimed to protect children had fled rather than face those she had endangered with her lies. Parent after parent rose to speak, their voices carrying the weight of collective outrage at how their children had been used as pawns in Karen's vendetta against Elena. Maria Santos clutched a tissue as she described her 6-year-old son's nightmares, how he flinched whenever he heard sirens or saw police officers. "My child was learning to love reading in Mrs. Carter's class," she said, her voice breaking. "Now he's afraid to go to school because someone decided his teacher was a terrorist based on the color of her skin." The room erupted in applause and murmurs of support, the community's solidarity with Elena evident in their unified response to Maria's words. Elena felt tears threatening as she looked around at the faces of families who had stood by her, despite the terrible accusations. Parents who trusted her with their most precious possessions and refused to let hatred drive her from the school she loved. Detective Morrison took the podium next, his presence commanding immediate attention as he laid out the findings of the investigation in clear, uncompromising terms. The evidence shows that Ms. Hutchins deliberately filed a false report alleging terrorist activity, knowing full well that her claims were baseless. She endangered the lives of children and school staff, wasted significant public resources, and caused severe psychological trauma to minors in pursuit of a personal vendetta against Mrs. Carter. The detective's words hung in the air like an indictment of everything Karen represented, the cold facts stripping away any possibility of misunderstanding or mitigation. This had not been a case of honest mistake or professional disagreement gone wrong. This had been a calculated attack designed to destroy Elena's career and reputation, using the machinery of law enforcement and the community's fears about school safety as weapons. The school board's vote was unanimous. Karen Hutchins was banned from all school district properties. Her substitute teaching certification revoked permanently. But beyond the administrative consequences, she now faced criminal charges that could result in significant jail time and financial penalties. The legal system that she had tried to manipulate against Elena was now focused on her own actions, weighing the serious consequences of using false terrorism accusations as tools of personal revenge. Elena wheeled herself to the microphone, the room falling silent as she prepared to speak publicly for the first time since the incident. Her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the sides of her wheelchair, but her voice was steady when she finally found the words. 3 weeks ago, I was teaching my students about caterpillars becoming butterflies. We were learning about transformation, about how beautiful things can emerge from difficult times. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. I never imagined I would need that lesson myself so soon. Her words drew soft chuckles from the crowd, the gentle humor helping to ease some of the tension that had gripped the room. Elena had always possessed this gift for finding light in darkness, for helping others see possibilities where others saw only problems. It was this quality that had made her such an effective teacher, and now made her survival of Karen's attack seem almost inevitable. I want to thank everyone who stood by me during the darkest days of my career. Elena continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. To the parents who trusted me with their children, despite the terrible things that were said. To my colleagues, who never doubted my integrity. To Dr. Williams, who fought for truth when lies seemed stronger. And most of all, to my students, who showed me that love is always more powerful than hate. The standing ovation that followed seemed to lift the roof off the gymnasium, hundreds of voices joining in applause that spoke to something deeper than mere approval. This was a community healing itself, choosing unity over division, truth over prejudice, hope over fear. Elena sat in her wheelchair at the center of it all, tears streaming down her face as she felt the warmth of acceptance washing away the cold shadow of Karen's hatred. 2 months later, Elena received the State Teacher of the Year award at a ceremony attended by hundreds of educators from across the district. She wore a blue dress that complemented her dark skin beautifully, her smile radiant as she accepted the recognition that Karen's false accusations had been designed to prevent. The irony was not lost on anyone present. An attempt to destroy Elena's reputation had instead elevated her to the highest honor her profession could bestow. In her acceptance speech, Elena spoke about the responsibility educators bear to protect all children from the poison of prejudice, to create spaces where differences are celebrated rather than feared. We are not just teaching reading and mathematics, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the packed auditorium. We are teaching children how to build a better world, one classroom at a time. That is our calling, our sacred trust, our hope for tomorrow. Karen watched the ceremony from her apartment. The local news coverage a bitter reminder of how completely her plan had backfired. Instead of destroying Elena, she had elevated her. Instead of exposing a supposed terrorist, she had revealed her own hateful nature. The substitute teacher who had once commanded a classroom now faced unemployment, legal bills, and the social isolation that comes with being exposed as a false accuser in a tight-knit community. The children in Elena's class had returned to their normal routines within weeks of the incident, their resilience a testament to both their youth and their teachers' skill in helping them process their trauma. They drew pictures of police officers and teachers working together, wrote stories about overcoming scary situations, and gradually rebuilt the sense of safety that Karen's lies had temporarily shattered. The caterpillar lesson had become more relevant than Elena could have imagined. Transformation happening not just in nature, but in the hearts of children, learning to separate truth from fear. The legal proceedings against Karen stretched through the fall and into winter, each court appearance drawing smaller crowds as the community's attention moved from punishment to healing. She ultimately pleaded guilty to charges of filing a false report and endangering the welfare of children, receiving a sentence of 18 months in county jail and 5 years of probation. The judge's words during sentencing reflected the community's collective judgment. Your actions endangered innocent children and sought to destroy the career of a dedicated educator based on nothing more than racial prejudice and professional jealousy. Elena used her unexpected fame to advocate for better support for educators facing discrimination, speaking at conferences and workshops about the importance of standing up to hatred in all its forms. Her wheelchair became a symbol not of limitation, but of determination. Proof that physical challenges need not prevent someone from making profound contributions to society. The very disabilities that Karen had seen as weaknesses became sources of strength, inspiring others to overcome their own obstacles. The Riverside Elementary School installed a new plaque in the main hallway, not commemorating the terrible day when fear had walked through its doors, but celebrating the triumph of community over division. It read simply, "In honor of our educators, who teach with courage, serve with compassion, and transform lives with love." Elena passed it every morning as she wheeled herself to class, her students running ahead to hold the door open, with the casual helpfulness of children who see assistance as friendship rather than pity. Spring brought new growth to the school grounds and new hope to the community that had weathered such an unexpected storm. Elena's classroom had been completely renovated over the winter break, the walls repainted in cheerful colors, and new books added to replace those damaged during the police search. But the most important changes were invisible. The bonds of trust rebuilt stronger than before. The commitment to inclusion deepened by adversity. The determination to never again let hatred masquerade as concern. The kindergarten graduation ceremony in June was Elena's most emotional yet, watching 20 young faces beam with pride as they prepared to move on to first grade. These were the children who had lain on the cafeteria floor in terror because of Karen's lies, who had seen their beloved teacher accused of terrible things they couldn't understand. Now, they wore caps and gowns, clutching certificates of completion, and looking forward to summer vacation with the confidence of students who had learned that sometimes adults make mistakes, but love always wins in the end. As the ceremony concluded, and families scattered to celebration dinners and backyard parties, Elena remained in the empty gymnasium for a few quiet moments. The silence was peaceful now. Not the frightened hush that had followed Karen's false accusation, but the satisfied quiet that comes at the end of a job well done. She thought about the caterpillar lesson that had started it all. How transformation sometimes requires a period of apparent destruction before beauty can emerge. The sound of small footsteps echoed across the polished floor, and Elena turned to see Marcus approaching with his parents. The shy boy who had whimpered on the cafeteria floor now walked with his shoulders back. His graduation cap slightly crooked, but his smile perfectly straight. "Mrs. Carter," he said solemnly, "thank you for teaching us to be brave." His mother's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son present Elena with a hand-drawn card showing two figures, one in a wheelchair, one standing, under a rainbow labeled "Friends Forever." Elena accepted the card with trembling hands, understanding that this moment represented something more valuable than any professional award or public recognition. In the end, her victory over Karen's hatred had not been won in courtrooms or school board meetings, but here, in the simple trust of a child who had learned that differences make the world more beautiful, not more dangerous. The transformation was complete. The butterfly finally free to soar on wings built from courage, strengthened by community, and painted with the brilliant colors of hope triumphant over hate. The evening sun slanted through the gymnasium windows as Elena wheeled herself toward the exit, ready to begin her summer vacation with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had weathered the storm and emerged stronger. Behind her, the empty room held echoes of applause and laughter, testimonies to a community's refusal to let prejudice define their future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students, new opportunities to plant seeds of acceptance in young hearts. But tonight, Elena Carter could rest in the knowledge that love had won, justice had prevailed, and the sacred work of education would continue in hands both gentle and strong.